Hi, I am Carol Chock, legislator from Tompkins County, District 3, primarily long-term residential areas adjacent to the Cornell campus. I'm also a Cornell alum. I'm currently chair of the Tompkins County Planning, Energy, and Environmental Quality Committee, where we are actively involved in multiple projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, encourage solar production, and build energy-efficient housing. I am former chair of the Facilities and Infrastructure Committee, where we built LEED equivalent facilities, arranged to build solar arrays at our airport, and instituted energy efficient controls in county buildings. My 7,530 constituents have seen their electric rates go up dramatically in spite of their own efforts to rein in energy use. Many have been actively working to oppose natural gas production and have told me they do not want to see either their tax dollars or their ratepayer dollars allocated to support fossil fuel development. Thank you to the PSC for coming to our county. I respect that your choices are tough, and I take seriously the need to provide reliable power to our residents and businesses. Upgrading transmission lines is the choice between the two you have laid out that will best build for the future. But I believe this particular discussion presents a false choice and skewed financials. A false choice because the New York State Energy Highway Blueprint promotes many options, not just these two. We will not achieve either our own adopted goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 2% per year in the Tompkins County Comprehensive Plan, or the New York State Draft Climate Action Plan to reduce 80% by 2050 in the state through repowering with gas. I say skewed financials because it makes no sense to ask ratepayers to cover a $30 million annual operating deficit plus the build out of the plant, or whatever, even if it's half those numbers, in order to cover 1.7 million or 2.1 million in local property taxes. Our other towns, I know it's tough, but our other towns fund roads, teachers, and football teams within their budgets without having a plant in their towns. It isn't right to tell the Lansing football players that they won't have a team when they're smart enough to know that these other school districts that they play don't have power plants there. Technical analysis by both NYSEG and the Sierra Club show that the ratepayers would continue to bear an undue burden with uncertain market risk that natural gas prices will rise. It makes even less sense when you factor in recovery costs from extreme climate events. There is another solution. The New York Energy Highway is a $5.7 billion, 3,200 megawatt plan that contains 4 major lanes. Not just these two. It is now accelerated due to Hurricane Sandy and other major climate events. Members of the PSC, please steer the Cayuga power plant onto the lane that builds renewable power. The PSC could assist our community in obtaining funds through, it funds for both the transition and to build with renewables, through the Regional Economic Development Council, RGGI, the Green Jobs, Green New York program, the Community Transitions program that is mentioned in the Energy Highway, EDGE, and many other programs. It is technically possible and would create green jobs, as laid out in the 2012 report by Jeremy Brecker of the Labor Network for Sustainability titled Jobs Beyond Coal. Realize that other gas plants in other areas have half the jobs of coal plants and many fewer than build out with renewables. I will also, when I hand this in, there are links to all of these studies that I'm mentioning. Use the ideas presented by Jacobson and others to make New York essentially carbon and nuclear free. They talk about 85% by 2030 and 100% by 2050 with technology that exists today. Also Google and see the Tompkins County Energy Roadmap, including the April 2012 studies of specific wind, solar, and biomass build-out potential, again with existing technology, at specific sites within Tompkins County. The solar study, for example, by Andrew Kurthois of the Cornell University School of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering demonstrated the detailed solar potential of 332 megawatts in Tompkins County using only existing big box industrial, school, and residential rooftops. New York State will be allocating the funds and the rate base in other locales for renewable power production with the Energy Highway. Why not here in Tompkins County? Support Jerry Goodenow and his investors to convert to renewables both at this site and have them be the ones to add additional sites. Require the Nucor steel plant in Auburn, which will need about a third of this energy, to scale back in demand response on the peak summer heat days. By definition, the peak days are those in which the sun is shining in the afternoon. Those are the peak times. Public incentives, whether they are in the form of policy, grants, preferred ratepayer allocations, or tax breaks, should no longer encourage legacy fossil fuels, but should be used to build a renewable future, supported by a modern grid. Choose the transmission upgrades for now. In addition, remove the false choice and invest ratepayer dollars in renewables on the site of the Cayuga power plant. Thank you.
After Ms. Villanes, we'll hear from Glenn Swanson, and I just want to say, for the benefit of people in the overflow room, if they're still there, there are plenty of seats now in the auditorium.
Good evening. My name's Dave Evanowski. I'm a taxpayer and a resident of Tompkins County. I'm also employed by the company that owns and operates the Cayuga Power Station. I've spent some time reviewing filings and news articles related to grid reliability issue that we're here to learn about tonight and to comment on. I've noticed that there's a number of what I'll call camps, for lack of a better word. There's one camp that's concerned about jobs, the local economy, viability of our school budget and county budget, and I put myself squarely in that camp. There's another camp that's concerned about low-cost energy and grid reliability. I put myself in that camp too. There's no question that by maintaining a generating resource at Cayuga through repowering, the grid reliability issue is solved. Also, a high-efficiency generator is less expensive than any of the generating resources that would step into the void that is left in the absence of a repowered Cayuga generator. There's also a third camp that I've noticed, obviously, that has the environment high on its list of priorities, and I support that group too. I think it would be a huge disservice to everyone here for me to claim that the repower project is more harmful to the environment than other options. In fact, a highly efficient gas-fired generator is a lower emitter than any of the resources that would be dispatched to fill the void created by the absence of a Cayuga generator. And here's why. Demand for power does not go away just because the generator is retired. That demand is there. There's no latent amount of renewable power just sitting out there waiting for 300 megawatts of generation to go away before it can come into the market. Renewable resources such as wind, solar, hydro are fully dispatched regardless of whether Cayuga is running. And a slice of system generation that will fill in for the Cayuga repowered project will be a higher cost, less efficient, coming from in-state or imported from out of state. It's not correct to assume that the Cayuga repower project will create greater demand for natural gas, since the replacement power will also be fueled by gas, which is being, generated by lesser efficient or inefficient generators. I ask the commissioners to take a look at all the facts objectively to determine which option is best not only for the schools and businesses and jobs in the local community in Tompkins County, but also for the state of New York. I believe that the objective review should look at more than just the initial cost to construct. An objective review would also include all of the benefits to the state of New York. A review that recognizes the Cayuga Power Project will not reduce demands for fossil fuels and reduce costs for energy. Such an objective view will recognize that the Cayuga repower option is the best option for everyone. Thank you.
After Ms. Chock, we'll hear from Leo Yanez.
Which mic am I speaking into here?
I'd like to thank the PSC for holding this public hearing. And I'd like to thank the Lansing schools for making sure that we could have it in Lansing, since it is vitally important to our town. As the Lansing Town Supervisor, I am in support of repowering of the Cayuga operating plant. The plant has been in operation in the town of Lansing since 1955. It has been the source of well-paying jobs and contributed substantially to the tax base that funds the operation of the town and the Lansing schools. Presently, taxes paid by the Cayuga operating plant make up 7.36% of taxes the town collects. It is my understanding that Governor Cuomo has instructed the Public Service Commission to take into account the economic impact on the communities in which coal-fired plants reside when deciding to repower them or close them down. Shutting down the Cayuga operating plant would have long-lasting and severe negative effects on Lansing in many areas. At a time when we all should be working together, the nation, the state, the county, cities, towns, and villages, to identify energy alternatives and work towards implementing them, this proposal makes sense. The transition to renewable energy sources will not take place overnight, and I do not believe I will see in my lifetime the elimination of fossil fuels as an energy source. The best we can hope for is a substantial decrease in the use of fossil fuels in the coming years. In order for Lansing to formulate and work on plans to implement technologies that use renewable energy sources, it must be financially able to do so. Grants are available to municipalities to invest in renewable technologies, but these grants never pay for everything. Towns must also contribute money to these projects. Last year, the town received a NYSERDA grant to improve the energy efficiency of its buildings. The town was responsible for the labor needed to put the energy-saving components in place, and also had to contribute $25,000 to the project. We had the money to do this and continue to reap the benefits of having done so. When we looked into putting solar panels on the town hall, it was discovered that the roof could not support the panels without a lot of costly renovation. We want to look for another way to supply the town buildings with solar energy, and when we do, money will be needed to get the job done. This money comes from the taxes that are paid to the town. Closing the Cayuga operating plant would decrease the amount of taxes collected by 7.36%. This in turn would make our efforts to pursue energy alternatives for the town difficult, if not impossible. At this point, it is not entirely clear whether or not the town would in fact have to increase taxes if the plant closes. Lansing residents also pay county taxes, which will be affected by the closing of the Cayuga operating plant. The county will need to tighten its belt or more than likely raise taxes for all county residents. Lansing schools are among the best in Tompkins County. People buy and build homes in Lansing so their children can attend Lansing schools. My husband and I chose to purchase a home in Lansing 30 years ago because we wanted the best education possible for our children. The schools have been dealing with a loss of tax revenue from the Cayuga operating plant for over 3 years. Further losses will have serious impact on programming and an increase in school taxes for the residents of Lansing. To be clear, Lansing residents will see an increase in their town, school, and county taxes if the Cayuga operating plant closes. When you consider increased taxes and the inability to take advantage of available grants in many areas, including those aimed at sustainability, Lansing's future should be a concern to all when making these decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Dave Evanosky, who will be followed by Carol Chock.
Good evening, my name is Sarah Eckel. I'm with Citizens Campaign for the Environment. I'm our Legislative and Policy Director. CCE represents 80,000 members across New York State. We're dedicated to protecting the environment and public health, and I'm here today. I'm also expressing frustration with the narrow scope that the PSC gave the utilities to look at, but within the context of that scope, we would support repowering the transmission in lieu of, upgrading the transmission in lieu of repowering the plant. Fossil fuel power plants such as Cayuga came online in the 50s. They're outdated, they're dirty, they're inefficient, and they're naturally being priced out of the energy market. Today we stand at an energy crossroads here in New York, and we can go backwards and shackle ourselves to fossil fuels, or we can move forward and start paving the way for a renewable energy future. Repowering the plant is not necessary. The ratepayers shouldn't be footing the bill for an unnecessary power plant when we can meet our energy needs in cheaper, more efficient ways that protect public health and our shared environment. The transmission upgrades are needed regardless of what happens with repowering. We need to invest in that now. And additionally, the greatest benefit to the environment is going to be not having gas or coal. It's going to be having zero emissions coming out of that plant. So obviously that would be our preferred choice. Investing in renewable energy and energy efficiency will benefit the local economy. CCE supports meaningful workforce transition assistance to communities where fossil fuel plants are retired, whether it be through the regional economic development councils, workforce training grants, or other programs or funding sources. New York State needs to take a leadership role and address this issue statewide. Ultimately, investing in energy efficiency and renewable energy will provide much greater long-term benefit to communities throughout New York by saving energy, providing price stability, creating jobs, reducing pollution, and addressing climate change. CCE strongly supports transmission upgrades as an alternative to costly, unnecessary repowering, and like I said earlier, we remain frustrated with the narrow scope that the PSC has provided in this proceeding. To compensate for the loss in generation produced by the plant, the Commission provided two options: repower or invest in upgrades, transmission upgrades. However, the Commission failed to include any feasibility analysis or eligibility for cost-effective non-transmission alternatives such as energy efficiency, clean renewable energy such as wind or solar, and demand response to play a role in the solution. Resources that are lower in both cost and environmental impact than repowering. We are realistic and we fully recognize that there may be technical limitations to meeting all energy needs with non-transmission alternatives. However, to the extent that non-transmission and non-repowering alternatives can meet at least some of the reliability needs, these alternatives should be given full and appropriate consideration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Kathy Miller, Lansing Town Supervisor.
I am the Lansing Superintendent, and I'd like to really thank Pat Pryor, because I think she has captured the Lansing community quite well in what she said to you. I also, speaking on behalf of the Board of Education, would like to say that we thank Senator Nozzolio and his support of the Lansing community, but also strongly feel that Barbara Lifton would do all the things that she's promised to do. Our fear, however, is the loss of students in between the change, and that there are a number of students who just left that will lose a lot in between. And so we are strongly urging that our community just get really informed by this. And that's our job as the Board of Education and myself. We are very concerned that the tax impacts on our school district community with the plant closing, of course. By no means does this insinuate in any way that we do not care about renewable energies and the environment, and teaching our students just that. Lansing School District is strongly dedicated to decreasing our footprint and increasing the use of renewable energy. And I've been working with Senator Nozzolio and Cayuga Power Plant on creating more solar energy options for the school district. Our community has suffered tax increases due to a reduction in state aid, as well as a decreasing value of Cayuga operating plant. These tax increases have all occurred while we at the school have actually decreased our budget and have made over $2 million in reductions these past 5 years. Our community has supported our schools, and I thank you for that. However, the reduction of a $1.25 minimum $1 million loss due to the plant going away will be too much to bear. We will need to make significant reductions that would greatly diminish the value of what it means to be educated in Lansing. We talk about reducing non-mandated programs that typically are what kids come to school for: sports, music, extracurricular activities. $1.25 million will also cut into class size and mandated programs. Our class size would likely to go up to the high 20s or 30s, and our community has said to us through making board policies that we will not have class sizes of this size. Every day in my office, I'm talking to a parent about why their child can't come to Lansing. They're not on the right line. I do fear that if these reductions happen, our current residents who suffer these tax increases to be part of the Lansing school community, and the residents who are trying so hard to get into the Lansing school community, that this will go away. I really value this community, and I'm here. My children go to this school because of all that we offer. And I really, truly thank the sacrifices that our community already has taken on to continue to have the program that we have today. And I encourage you to please consider the school district when making your decision. Thank you.
I want to start by thanking the PSC for extending the public comment period on this important issue. My name is Martha Robertson. I'm chair of the Tompkins County Legislature, but I speak tonight for myself. I also extend my best wishes to Commissioner Audrey Zibelman. I hope she joins you soon. I strongly urge that the PSC and Governor Cuomo's administration keep the Cayuga operating plant and its sister, the Dunkirk NRG plant, open. These plants are vital for their local economies in terms of the jobs and the tax base they provide, as many families and communities continue to struggle in these difficult economic times. For these and other reasons, it makes sense to maintain local control of our energy. However, the narrow choice that the plant operators and the utilities have been asked to make, and that we've been asked to comment on, is a false choice. There is a practical, proven alternative to repowering to natural gas to keep these plants open that would lower their environmental impact and create even more jobs for New Yorkers. I call on the PSC to consider keeping Lansing and Dunkirk open as coal-fired plants, but retrofitting them to co-fire with biomass. Yes, I said keep them in coal, but retrofit to co-fire with biomass. This is a practical solution that's already being used widely. And I will quote briefly from a recent report from the USDA called Co-Firing Biomass and Coal for Fossil Fuel Reduction. Co-firing with biomass could be an excellent bridge strategy to quickly reduce greenhouse gases for a given facility, whether or not coal would be used in the future. A technical and economic feasibility study is needed to explore this option for our plants before any decision is made. And I know the Lansing Town Board looked at this, discussed this a couple of years ago. I know Jerry Goodnow's been studying this for 6 or 7 years, but I also know that the task given was to do this or to do that with respect. The Public Service Commission works for us. I ask that the Public Service Commission open this discussion up and consider another option. There is no reason not to consider co-firing biomass with coal at Lansing and Dunkirk. This alternative would have the following advantages. It would keep the plants open, providing reliable electricity and good jobs and stabilizing the tax base. By maintaining coal operations, the investment needed to retrofit to co-fire with biomass would be modest compared to a full conversion to gas. Therefore, this could be the least expensive alternative for ratepayers who will eventually be asked to cover the cost. It would likely also be the quickest solution to implement. Co-firing with biomass would reduce coal use by up to 30%, cutting the plant's health and climate damaging emissions, and generating and processing and transporting the biomass could create up to 3 times more jobs than either the repowering or the transmission alternatives. It would also help to maintain the viability of our railroad infrastructure. Now, what does biomass mean? Biomass is basically any kind of fuel that basically has an organic, it comes from organic processes. And the viable feedstocks are many and varied, including switchgrass, agricultural waste such as plant material and cow manure, and municipal solid waste, as well as wood scraps, packaging materials, and textiles that can't be recycled. With time and innovation, the percentage of biomass used could be increased further, replacing even more coal in the mix. If we go in this direction, if we go in the direction, for example, of converting waste to energy, as a couple of people have mentioned, today's technology is vastly improved and much safer than earlier efforts. We would solve major economic and environmental problems for farmers, for cities, for businesses and manufacturers by removing waste from landfills, turning liabilities into marketable commodities. Right now, 10 plants in New York State and 400 or so, at least in Europe, use solid waste for fuel. This is not, I didn't make this up. Whatever the particular biomass we would use, we would create a new market and stimulate the supply chain for feedstocks produced right here in New York. We could become a leader in these technologies. Cornell University and SUNY Fredonia, where Chautauqua County, where Dunkirk is, could become hubs for biomass research, creating spin-off businesses and even more jobs, spurring the economy while benefiting the environment. This solution will also enhance critical fuel diversity, protect our economic future. Now, we used to talk a lot about fuel diversity, not so much anymore. I think we really need to. We need to protect our economic future from price hikes, supply disruptions, and instability that occur from being overly dependent on one source of electricity generation. New gas plants are only economical at today's historically low gas prices. Now, NISEC, Tim talked about the uncertainty about the prices, about the future prices for gas. Well, I found a graph today online. Yeah, I know you all can't see that. I'll be submitting it with my testimony, but I will tell you that in the last 10 years, in 2002, the price for gas per MBTU was $3. In 2006, it was almost $12. In 2007, it was under $6. In 2008, it was over $12. In 2012, it was under $3. Now, at $4, if I learned anything from Jerry over the years, but working with him on the IDA, if it's at $4, coal competes with gas. So what happens when gas is more than $4? Domestic prices, in fact, are expected to nearly double by 2017, according to most analysts. And if we begin to export liquefied natural gas, the price could escalate even further. When that happens, the repowered gas plants would no longer be economical. Biomass plus coal solves the problem. Keeps a fuel mix, a fuel diversity in New York State. It avoids making major new investments in gas infrastructure, which would lock us into this fossil fuel and its volatile prices for decades to come, and postpone the investments we need to switch to safe, local, and fully renewable sources of energy. This solution makes new gas pipeline construction unnecessary. Now, the public hasn't been told how much the transmission upgrades would cost or where that power would be generated. This is a serious flaw in this process, leaving us to speculate on the transmission option. If the transmission upgrades are chosen and Lansing and Dunkirk are shut down, it's very possible that our power would come from out of state, and that was part of the Cayuga presentation. It's quite possible the generation would come from dirtier plants. And if the power came from a non-RGGI state, from a state outside the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative Compact, in other words, Pennsylvania or Ohio or Canada, we would also be siphoning revenue from NYSERDA. That's where NYSERDA gets its money so that we can do all these renewable projects. If that happened, we'd be going truly in the wrong direction. Now, even if we invest quickly and heavily in wind, water, and solar power, the transition to renewable energy and a smart grid will take time. Co-firing biomass with coal will maintain reliability in the meantime. Now, to quote that USDA report again, biomass is a significant renewable energy option for the U.S., and co-firing is perhaps the best short-term means of reducing carbon dioxide emissions for coal-burning facilities. The stakes are very high, as the Cayuga and Dunkirk plants serve an important role in meeting our energy needs, providing quality jobs, and supporting our communities. I urge the PSC to conduct a technical and economic feasibility study to explore the option of co-firing biomass with coal before a decision is made. We must consider the alternative that would keep both plants open. Keep both these plants open, saving jobs and creating even more employment opportunities while lowering costs, lowering risks, and lowering environmental impacts. This is a decision for the decades. We owe it to our children to take the time to explore all the options and get it right. Thank you.
We have quite a few other public officials who have signed up to speak. At this point, I'm going to begin to mix in some of the others who have signed up to speak. I'm also, to keep things moving, I'm going to call on one name ahead so that we have somebody on deck. Our next speaker will be Chris Petagrasso, Lansing School District Superintendent, and immediately following the superintendent will be Sarah Eckel.
Thank you. Good evening. Senator, Assemblywoman, all of our guests up here on the panel tonight, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have, in the interest of time and the fact that we have so many other speakers, I have decided to somewhat condense the comments that I was prepared to make tonight, but I would like to submit the full text after I get done speaking. We have a restaurant up the road here. It's called Crossroads. And I think in a lot of ways that kind of symbolizes for me where the town of Lansing is right now. If I could have confidence that the kind of future that Assemblywoman Lifton described in terms of asking the PSC to essentially go back to the drawing board and come up with a totally different plan that would include biomass or solar or whatever. I think there are many people in the community, including myself, who would support something like that. I suspect that just about everyone can say with pretty good certainty that the future is dependent on our increased movement toward the use of renewables. But that future is not here yet. And I think for the near future, we are going to have to continue to have some kind of a mix of both fossil fuels and renewables. And I did not hear among the people that spoke to us from the panel during the educational part of this tonight that there was an option offered to go back to the drawing table and come back with a different proposition that would include only the use of renewables for this plant in Lansing. As far as the fossil fuels, particularly natural gas, I understand and the problems with methane. I too have read a lot of those same documents. What I did find out as I was getting ready to prepare for tonight is that over 30%, close to 31% of the power, the electrical energy that is consumed in this part of New York State, at least as of 2011, which is the last year for which I could find figures, comes from natural gas. That's in our homes. Every time you turn on an electric switch, unless you are totally off the grid, every time you use electricity in your house, over 30% of that comes from natural gas. The second highest fuel source that's consumed in our part of New York State comes from, nuclear. That's the second highest one. And I don't think that's one that any of us would like to see to continue to use indefinitely into the future. The thing is that that percentage, that almost 31%, is going to stay the same whether or not this plant is converted to natural gas, because we get our power from the grid. The power that's made by the Cayuga plant goes into the grid, and the power that comes to us here in Lansing comes from the grid and to all of Tompkins County. So yes, we can be concerned about the use of natural gas, and yes, we can say we would like to go toward renewables, but for the near future, it's not going to make any difference. This is really not a question of fracking, and it's really not a time to talk about whether or not natural gas is the fuel of the future. We all know that it's not. The question is, how do we get from here to there? And I would say that at this point in time, that there needs to be continued use of a mix of fuels. And there is a population of Lansing. We're going to switch tracks here just a little bit now. Senator Nozzolio spoke very eloquently about some of the other groups in Lansing and how they're going to be impacted by this. I want to mention our farming community. We have a large farming community in North Lansing. We have some of the best farmland in North Lansing of any place in the county. We all know that family farms in recent years have come under pressure to try and stay in business. And because of that fact, there have been a number of places in Tompkins County where family farmers have had to sell off part of their land to developers. That's caused the price of farmland to jump. And what that means in a recent reassessment is that the cost of the value of the farmland has jumped considerably. The taxes for our farmers in North Lansing skyrocketed this last year because of reevaluation. I can't imagine as a school district or a town board or as a county going back to the taxpayers of Lansing and saying, you have to make up the difference for what we would lose if this power plant closes. And yes, we can talk about alternatives that might help to fill in some of the gaps. That sounds to me as if, yes, maybe someplace down the road, we might possibly get some money from someplace. I'm talking about 15 teachers lost in the Lansing School District by September. Once those programs disappear, the sports, the music, the art, all of those things that are not the core subjects, you don't get them back just because someplace down the road you get some money to help make up the difference. It just doesn't happen that way. We have an excellent school district here in Lansing. We're all proud of it. People move here because they want their kids to go to school here. That will go away if this plant closes. Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Martha Robertson, Chair of Tompkins County Legislature.
So I'm a little taller than Pat. Wait a minute. Here we go.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the PSC for holding this important public forum and public hearing, and for extending the comment period until mid-August. I've spent a good portion of the last 5 years studying the issues of high-volume hydrofracking, fracking as we call it. And it is important to understand that most, if not all, of the natural gas that would repower this plant would be fracked gas. Fracked not here in New York, but in other states in our country. Over the 5 years I've studied this issue, I have read countless articles, emails, and studies. I have read and listened to both sides of the discussion in meetings, in movies, at rallies, in every conceivable mode of communication. I've been to Pennsylvania twice and hope to make a third trip this fall. It's sort of been like a 5-year teach-in, topped off in the last few weeks by reading most recent state energy plan and the 2030 plan that's been referenced a few times here, the 2030 New York Renewable Plan by Dr. Robert Howarth of Cornell and Dr. Mark Jacobson of Stanford, that would have New York State begin the process of going fully renewable over the next 17 years. My study of all of this fracking has led me to conclude that continuing down the path of fossil fuel energy puts our lives and future generations at unconscionable risk. As the overwhelming majority of our climate scientists have made clear, climate change is happening now, ahead of schedule, well ahead of schedule, in fact. They are not alarmists, as it turns out, as the fossil fuel industry has often charged, but in fact are cautious and conservative in their estimates and conclusions, as scientists usually are. They tell us now that climate change is progressing more quickly than they had predicted, with the Arctic sea ice rapidly melting and greenhouse gases now at perilous levels, 400 parts per million. The scientists tell us that we are seeing these very dangerous climate impacts because of global warming due to our use of fossil fuel. The destruction is becoming ever more visible to us. Last year, 60 lives were lost in Superstorm Sandy in New York State, 48 of them in New York City, 125 in the whole country. 56 people died in Hurricane Irene, 18 in Tropical Storm Lee. All of these, of course, in New York State. In the Moore, Oklahoma tornado in May of this year, there were 25 deaths, including 10 children. Just recently, 19 specially trained ACE team firefighters were lost in Arizona fighting out of control wildfires. and many other lives have been lost in U.S. storms and flooding over the past few years. Losses that climate scientists are telling us are above the norm and attributable to global warming and the climate change that results. Philadelphia, we know, on Sunday saw 8 inches of rain in 24 hours. Most of that 8 inches falling in 4.5 hours, smashing all previous records. The UN has estimated that about 300 people around the world every year are dying due to climate change, from flooding and drought and wildfires, from tsunamis and other storms. Climate change is happening now, and now Americans are being added to the list of tragic deaths. Besides the cost, of course, in human lives, are billions upon billions in property damage. Superstorm Sandy alone cost $60 billion. These are what we call externalized costs from the use of fossil fuel. They don't show up in our utility bill. We pay these costs in our tax dollars and insurance payments. Our top climate scientists, Bill McKibben, James Hansen, recently retired as NASA's chief climate scientist, and others, aren't just talking to us anymore about this. They are screaming at us. They are telling us that we have run out of time to begin seriously responding to the existential threat of climate change. When we have staid academics like McKibben and Hansen getting arrested because our federal government is nearly paralyzed in responding to this crisis, we should understand we are no longer in business as usual mode. The jig is up. We have tried bargaining with Mother Nature, and she is responding with a vengeance. She is telling us that we must end our suicidal addiction to fossil fuel. Hence, building new infrastructure for gas, for natural gas, for fracked gas, which is likely, according again to many of these same scientists, likely worse than coal in terms of greenhouse gases and climate change, makes no sense. I have followed the debate, though it is hardly a debate anymore, about the extremely negative effects of methane gas, what we call natural gas, on global warming and climate change, particularly in the crucial 20-year window that lies ahead. Several very reputable studies, including ones from NASA, Goddard Institute for Space Studies, and Cornell, now conclude that methane is a much more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2, 105 times more potent as a greenhouse gas in the 20-year window, and therefore a tremendous problem in the short run especially. Natural gas, methane, is only green at the end, at the tap. With methane leaks through the whole life cycle, natural gas, methane, is more polluting than coal in terms of greenhouse gas. And why does the short term of 20 years matter? Because again, the climate scientists are telling us the Arctic ice is melting, the sea ice is melting at a very rapid pace. Our scientists are saying at this rate, it may disappear in 20 to 30 years. This short window matters. So far, the EPA has been using a 100-year window. They are re-examining that. They are looking at new studies coming in, and we may see new data coming from the EPA because of that, let us hope. They fear that without the Arctic ice, the whole climate system is likely to go totally awry, shutting down the Atlantic Gulf Stream, which warms Europe and makes Northern Europe habitable at all. We need to be weaning ourselves off methane, that is, natural gas, not adding to the demand for it. But does that mean that we should close this local plant? While it is not one of the options currently before the PSC, I strongly urge that we go on pause and do a feasibility study of a renewable biomass power plant in its stead. According to Jacobson, Howarth, DeLucci, Scobie, and al., who have done heroic work in giving us a strong and plausible path to a fully renewable future here in New York, biomass renewable energy production could be done on a temporary basis for about 20 to 30 years. It would need to be phased out as renewables are phased in over that period of time. The PSC should think about making this power plant a demonstration project for solid biofuel, which might include willow, switchgrass, and the abundant farm waste, among other possibilities in central and southern tier of New York. We know that this works in other places. Someone mentioned waste to energy. Denmark does a great deal in this area, and other countries. And this seems the perfect place to do such an energy plant amid the thousands of farms in this area. While I understand that the current capacity concerns are downstate, we would be smart to study the great potential for migration of people to upstate, it seems to me, over the next decade and beyond, given the ferocious hits to the East Coast, again predicted by our climate scientists and now happening. The PSC should strongly consider holding on to this plant as a renewable demonstration project and not relinquish the added capacity it would bring to upstate as more people move here, especially if we are wise enough to preserve our wonderful upstate water. It's impossible for me to evaluate the transmission options, as I'm not clear on where the electricity would come from and whether it would be indeed cleaner energy. If the PSC nonetheless decides to close this plant, I will work, of course, to try to bring RGGI funds or other Green Communities funds through a transition period to the county, municipalities, and of course the Lansing School District to supplant the pilots this plant has paid. Massachusetts does this with its RGGI funds, and it is my understanding that our Cleaner, Greener Communities funding can be used to support communities as they transition to renewables. I will also continue to work for other green initiatives and green jobs money to retrain workers for a sustainable green economy. In fact, as just one example of the sort of thing we ought to be doing to create green jobs while bringing down greenhouse gases, I have a new bill this introduced last session that would give a tax credit to home buyers for a new or retrofitted energy efficient home. It is projected to create 40,000 jobs in the construction industry, for which, of course, we would have to retrain workers. Going green creates good local jobs that will never be outsourced. As you listen here tonight, and read the comments in the weeks ahead, you will see that our community is divided on the proposed solutions, but we are not divided in wanting a healthy economy that provides a good job for everyone and a secure tax base for our schools and governments. We are at a crossroads in our state, in our country, in fact, worldwide. We have critical choices to make at all levels of government. They are, if we are to believe our nation's and our world's top scientists, literally life and death decisions. In every decision we make from here on out, we must move away from the choice of fossil fuel. I find it more than ironic that we are always talking about wanting our schools to produce more mathematicians and scientists, endlessly pointing out the failure of our schools and not doing enough in this area. But at the same time, we very often ignore the advice of our best scientists. We as a nation are too often putting politics above science and profits, of course, politics and profits above science. We continue to do so at enormous risk, the greatest risk humanity has ever faced. However, here in New York, we have a proud tradition of leading on crucial environmental issues, and we should not slip back from that leadership. In this specific instance, I would ask that the PSC bring us all together around a forward-thinking solution that protects workers, school districts, municipalities, and our ever more fragile environment that sustains us all. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker will be Pat Pryor, Tompkins County Legislator.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Mike Nizzolio, and it's my honor to be here tonight. Thank you, Judge. Those of you who were discussing graduating from Cornell, well, I have an undergraduate degree from Cornell, a master's degree from Cornell in resource economics, and in spite of that, I was elected to serve in the New York State Senate, representing this great community. Thank you, Commissioner Sayre, and all members of the Public Service Commission staff for being here tonight. My special thanks, and echo the comments, to thank Chris Petagrasso and the staff of the Lansing High School and Great Middle School for moving mountains to ensure that this hearing be held in Lansing. Dozens of times I've gone on record to oppose the draft hydrofracking regulations of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation because I believe they do not adequately protect the Finger Lakes region. But let's make it very clear. Let's make it very clear. This hearing tonight is not about hydrofracking of gas in New York State. Converting the Cayuga plant has nothing to do with fracking. Pat Pryor, who represents, I hope that those catcalls in the middle of my comments would be minimized, as I would respectfully ask that everyone give every member testifying today that respect. County Legislator Pat Pryor, who represents Lansing, in her past remarks, highlighted the fact that the gas supplied to the repowered plant would be from the interstate pipeline. Well, Pat was right then, she's right now, and that the bottom line is that a repowered Cayuga plant would not require and would not benefit from fracking projects in New York State. We're here today because the PSC has to consider a wide range of issues in deciding whether the Cayuga plant or other energy generators in this state should be repowered, should be sited, that the impact that they need to analyze is what would the impact be of repowering the Cayuga plant on the economy. This was a change in the law that took place this year. What the economic impact is of permanent jobs, of temporary jobs, of economic development, of local tax revenue, and electric market competitiveness. That is in the statute enacted just a few months ago. So I thank the PSC for being here. Now, let's talk about Lansing. It's very important that the members are here tonight to hear about the most important issue facing the citizens of Lansing. They'll be impacted by this decision. A variety of people. Those school children who deserve a quality education. The senior citizens in Lansing struggling on fixed incomes who are already having difficulty making ends meet to buy their groceries and pay their taxes. On my walk down the aisle tonight, I met one of those senior citizens, someone who I had known for many years, who I asked him how long he spent his life in Lansing. He said his entire life. And he wants to continue spending the rest of his life in Lansing, but he's here tonight because he's concerned that he's not going to be able to afford the property taxes in Lansing if this plant is not repowered. And the mothers and fathers who need to keep their jobs to support their families. There are firemen, volunteer firemen from Lansing who want to be able to continue to protect their communities. There tonight are teachers and educators in the Lansing School District who devote their whole careers to helping students. There are job seekers from Lansing and the entire Finger Lakes region who are hopeful they may have opportunities to work on the very significant job producing construction projects that are being proposed. Leaders of the Tompkins County Chamber of Commerce who represent small business, those small business owners in Lansing, as well as economic developers from Tompkins County and the Town of Lansing Economic Development Committee are fighting every day to grow jobs, and they are concerned about the future of Lansing without a repowered Cayuga plant. Even members of the Lansing High School football team, they came here tonight because they're concerned about whether or not the school district in Lansing will be able to continue sports programs. And there were a number of other students here tonight who were helping because they're concerned with a continuation of extracurricular activities within their school. Those children are what this issue is all about. Commissioner Sayre, members of the panel, they all need to be listened to tonight. They all have the common bond of living in Lansing, loving Lansing, and caring about Lansing's future. They also share a collective concern that the loss of the Cayuga power plant would have a devastating economic impact on this community. We all fear those eventualities. We are filled with concerns, and those concerns are real. It was put up on the screen today, but I want you to have that indelibly marked on your brain when you leave this room tonight and you realize that if that plant is not repowered, there will be an 11% tax increase immediately to the average Lansing taxpayer. Your taxes are going to skyrocket. The increases of 11.7% in our school taxes, town taxes, at least by 7.4%. That's if you own the average house in Lansing. If it's above the average, it will be, of course, more, at least an average of a $600 tax hike to every Lansing property taxpayer, on top of other burdens that you already bear. The jobs that will be lost, the 40 that exist now at the Cayuga power plant, the potential to gain another 50. That's 90 high-tech jobs that would be gone if this plant is not repowered. Hundreds and hundreds of construction jobs if this plant is not repowered. And let's talk for a second about energy dependence, the power produced out of state. This further impedes job growth. By repowering the Cayuga plant, our region becomes increasingly dependent, if it's not repowered, on energy produced in other places, other states, possibly other countries. They're not going to be producing that power under the high environmental standards of New York, that I believe certainly for these reasons, and these reasons alone are enough. The local economy, the devastation of the tax rate, the situation of the schools. I believe, frankly, the proposal that put forward to also explore additional renewable energy alternatives is real, is genuine, is feasible, and can be nurtured, and it should be nurtured. And the proposal that made by those wanting to repower Cayuga certainly better be complied with over the long term on that endeavor. Governor Cuomo has established an energy highway blueprint focusing on alternatives to transmission system upgrades, accelerating the modernization of those plants that are producing electricity in New York. And that is a very important objective. Regarding NYSEG's proposal, I think some of the questions that were asked were certainly very relevant. Who's going to pay for those improvements? Where are they going to be made? How are the ratepayers going to fund this? And what will the costs be? But one thing I was concerned about, everyone else that asked questions were concerned about redacting. One thing it wasn't redacted because it just wasn't there. In the entire 21-page proposal by NYSEG, to the Public Service Commission, a mere 2 paragraphs were devoted to the topic of the economic impact the NYSEG proposal would have on Lansing and the entire Finger Lakes region. 21 pages, 2 paragraphs. That 2-paragraph analysis is inadequate and far from the thorough analysis that the Public Service Commission required. And some residents of Lansing are very concerned that NYSEG may have purposely chosen to ignore the PSC's directive because that directive also asked to analyze the economic impact to the town residents of Lansing. Where will that power come from? Well, 300 megawatts. If Cayuga isn't repowered, how do we replace it? Certainly becoming more dependent on power that has a much greater carbon footprint is something that should give everyone concern. Just last week, we had a very hot and humid week, 2 weeks ago. It was extremely hot, it was extremely humid. On that day of July 22nd, New York successfully met a new record peak demand for electricity thanks to the excellent performance by its participants, most notably as part the Cayuga plant. The Cayuga plant is one of the only remaining generating facilities located in the central part of New York State, and it provides critical support for our local system and the bulk system. Shutting down this plant jeopardizes the reliability of the entire energy generating system in New York State. The 300 megawatts of electric power generated locally by the Cayuga plant provide electricity to approximately 350,000 homes. And stated another way, that's 350,000 families. And that number is far greater than the combined populations of Tompkins, Chemung, Seneca, Cayuga, and Cayuga counties. To eliminate this source of generating power would put our region's people and businesses at risk. Just think what it was like 2 weeks ago. And just think of the stress and the health concerns and the safety consequences for the elderly and the sick that would benefit from brownouts or loss of service. I don't understand NYSEG's position regarding additional generation of power. There are several projects that are currently being delayed in the region I serve, and one is further housing growth and development in the town of Lansing itself that would enhance the tax base. There's another project, we mentioned Auburn, there's another project in Auburn that my office is involved with. NYSEG has been very helpful in listening, but the fact of the matter is they're hamstrung by the fact that there's not enough power being generated in our state. We need to keep up demand. Is this going to be a growth state or a state that's going to continue to shrink? We can't be a growth state without power, without electricity, because I dare say anyone in this room, regardless of what side you're on, regardless of how you believe, regardless of what questions you have, will use electricity, a lot of it, before you go home tonight, when you get home tonight, and when you get up tomorrow. Last but not least, the New York State Energy Highway, if it's to continue, it has to upgrade that highway. If we fail to promote the continued development of electric production, in our region particularly, this energy highway is going to be reduced to little more than a footbridge to nowhere. Lastly, in conclusion, repowering the Cayuga plant will prevent devastating tax increases on Lansing homeowners and area businesses. Repowering the Cayuga plant prevents significantly reduced services for Lansing residents, as well as prevent devastating losses on the Lansing School District, including the loss of critical teaching positions, fewer class offerings, larger class sizes, and the possible elimination of sports and other extracurricular activities. When you repower the Cayuga plant, you ensure that Lansing's largest single taxpayer will continue to pay taxes, and the average Lansing property taxpayer will not have to suffer seeing their tax bills increase by $600 or more. The repowering of the Cayuga plant prevents the Lansing School District from becoming the highest taxed non-city school district in Tompkins County. Massive tax hikes, critically important school funds, children not receiving the education they need and deserve, deep and painful cuts in essential town and county services, private sector job losses, higher electricity bills, reliance on out-of-state power. These are very real consequences important consequences, and most important consequences to the citizens of Lansing. It's those citizens that we want to see have hope and prosperity, as well as the entire Finger Lakes region. Respectfully, repower the Cayuga plant.
Thank you, Senator. Our next speaker is Senator Tom Omar. All right, then we will hear from Assemblywoman Barbara Lifton.